In the small coastal town of Zarephath, a widow sat outside her humble home, gathering a few dry sticks. Her face was worn with sorrow and exhaustion. The drought that had plagued the land for months had left her with almost nothing. Her flour jar was nearly empty and her jug of oil held only a few drops. As she picked up the sticks, her mind raced with worry. How would she feed her son? How long could they survive on so little? That morning she had made a difficult decision. She would prepare one last meal for her and her son. After that, there would be no more food, no more hope. As she gathered the sticks, a stranger approached her at the town gate. He was a rugged man with the presence of someone who had endured much. His name was Elijah, a prophet of the Lord God of Israel. "Please bring me a little water in a jar so I may drink," Elijah said to the widow. The widow paused, surprised by the request, but nodded. Though water was scarce, she could spare a little. She turned to fetch it. As she walked away, Elijah called after her, "And please bring me a piece of bread." The widow stopped in her tracks, her heart sinking. She turned back to the prophet, her voice trembling with despair. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she said, "I have no bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah looked at her with compassion. He understood her fear, but he also knew the God who provides. "Do not be afraid," he said gently. "Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me and bring it to me. Then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." The widow's heart wrestled with doubt and hope. Could she trust this man? Could she believe in a promise so bold? If she gave away the little she had, what if there was nothing left? But something stirred in her spirit, a quiet, steady voice of faith. She remembered the stories of the God of Israel, the one who had parted the sea and provided manna in the wilderness. Perhaps this was her moment to trust in him. With trembling hands, she returned home and gathered the last of her flour and oil. She made a small loaf of bread and brought it to Elijah. As he took the bread, he smiled, and she felt a peace she hadn't known in months. The next morning, the widow woke up early, expecting to see her empty flour jar and dry oil jug. But to her astonishment, the jar still held flour, and the jug still had oil. She rushed to make breakfast for her son, and the provision continued day after day, week after week. The flour never ran out, and the oil never ran dry. God's promise had come true. A tragedy strikes. But just as the widow began to feel hope again, tragedy struck. Her son fell ill. His breathing grew shallow and his body grew cold. Despite her desperate prayers and attempts to revive him, the boy died in her arms. Her heart shattered. Grief overwhelmed her, and she turned to Elijah in despair. "What do you have against me, man of God?" she cried. "Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" Elijah's heart broke for her. He took the lifeless boy from her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying. He laid the boy on the bed and prayed earnestly to God. "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die? Let this boy's life return to him." 3 times Elijah stretched himself out over the boy, crying out to God for a miracle. And God heard Elijah's prayer. The boy's chest rose and fell. His eyes opened. Life returned to him. Elijah picked up the boy and carried him back to his mother. "Look," he said with a smile of joy, "your son is alive." The widow fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Now I know that you are a man of God," she said, "and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth."